I was only 21 when I met Richard. Back then, he was all charm and promise, messy hair, loud laugh, ideas bigger than his paycheck. I was working at a diner downtown, saving for nursing school. He came in every Thursday night after his shift at the auto shop, always ordered black coffee and fries, always sat at the counter near the window. The first time he left me a tip, it was a single folded napkin with a drawing of a flower and his phone number written inside the petals. It was silly, childish, but I kept that napkin. I still have it, pressed between the pages of my old journal. That's how it started. What came next wasn't a whirlwind romance, not like the movies. It was slow, real. He'd show up on days I wasn't working just to walk me home. He learned how I liked my tea. Too much sugar, no lemon. He listened when I talked about school, about how I wanted to work in elder care because I missed my grandmother. He told me he never had someone care about him the way I did. We didn't get married, not at first. Not ever, actually. That always bothered his mother. "You're playing house with no ring," she used to say. But we didn't need papers, we told ourselves. We were a team, partners. That was enough. We moved into a small one-bedroom above a laundromat. I took extra shifts at the hospital once I finally became a nurse. He started his own repair shop in the garage behind a gas station. Money was tight, but we made it work. We always did. Years passed like waves. Quiet, gentle, repetitive. You don't notice the erosion of time until the shore looks different. Richard had a bad fall when he was 35, broke his ankle climbing a ladder at work. I drove him to the hospital, helped him shower for weeks, and paid the rent while he recovered. He called me his guardian angel, wrote me love notes on sticky pads and left them on the bathroom mirror. When his mother died, I was the one who arranged everything. Flowers, food, guests. Richard couldn't stop crying. I held his head against my chest like a child. "You're my family now," he whispered. Still, no ring. But we had shared bank accounts, shared holidays, shared grief. That had to mean something, right? I cooked every night. Even on days I worked 12-hour shifts, I folded his laundry, paid half the mortgage when we bought a little fixer-upper in a quiet suburb. I gave up promotions when his anxiety got worse. He said he didn't want to be alone too long. I agreed. When his brother got into drugs, we took in his niece for almost a year. I became her stand-in mother. Homework, ballet recitals, late-night stomach bugs. I was the one who stayed up. Richard praised me to everyone we knew. I couldn't do it without her, he'd say. Years turned to decades. We never had children. That was never the plan. Or maybe it was once, and we just stopped talking about it when work and bills took over. But I mothered in my own way. I mothered him through every illness, every setback, every stretch of his life when the world turned away. I stayed. He went through a deep depression in his late 40s, lost his business, stayed in bed for weeks. I didn't complain. I just worked longer, came home with his favorite food, left soft music playing in the background so the house wouldn't feel so quiet. I read articles on mental health, sat beside him without talking, waited. He got better slowly, then thanked me by saying, "No one else would have waited for me." But he was wrong. I didn't wait for him. I carried him. I was his nurse when he got sick, his secretary when bills stacked too high, his cook, his partner, his world. And I never asked for anything back. Not a ring, not a fancy vacation, not even a thank you most days. Because I believed in loyalty. I believed in shared history. I believed in us. We aged quietly together 40 years, 40 Christmases, 40 New Year's mornings with cheap champagne and tired smiles. People would ask if we were married, and I'd smile, shake my head, and say, "No, but he's mine." That was my mistake. I didn't realize he was never mine. I was his. And people like Richard don't value what they don't have to work to keep. It started small, little changes in his routine. Richard, the man who once needed help logging into his email, was suddenly obsessed with rebranding his image. He bought new clothes, shirts with labels I'd never seen before, shoes that cost more than our entire weekly grocery list. His graying hair was freshly dyed. He shaved every morning, wore cologne even on days we weren't going out. "I'm just taking better care of myself," he said when I asked. "Don't I deserve to look good at my age?" Of course he did, but it wasn't just about looking good. He started staying out late, said he was catching up with old friends, men I never met. Sometimes he didn't come home until after midnight. Sometimes he didn't answer his phone for hours. Then came the locked phone screen, the password he wouldn't share. He who once handed me his phone to Google something now clutched it like a secret. I tried not to assume. I tried to give him space, but the woman's voice on his voicemail one day made my stomach twist. It was short, innocent sounding. "Hey, it's me. Let me know if you're still coming over tonight. I picked up that wine you liked." She didn't say a name. She didn't have to. I confronted him that night. We were in the kitchen. I was chopping onions. He came in smelling like a bar, cheap beer, and a scent I didn't recognize. "Who is she?" I asked, knife still in hand. He froze. "What are you talking about?" I repeated the question. He didn't answer at first. Then he sat down, rubbed his face, and said, "It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think, Richard." And then like a hammer to my chest, he said it. "Her name's Claire. We've been seeing each other for a few months." A few months. I stood still, the knife still in my hand, the onions half chopped. "You've been cheating on me?" He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no. "She makes me feel seen," he whispered. I stared at him. "Seen? Like the woman who held your head while you cried after your mother's funeral didn't see you? Like the woman who spent 40 years of her life carrying yours didn't see you?" I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just walked away. That night, I slept in the guest room. My heart didn't know what to do. It was too broken to beat the same way. He didn't come in to check on me. He didn't try to talk. The next morning, he made toast like nothing happened, and I realized he had already moved on. I just hadn't been told. 2 weeks later, he dropped the real bomb. "I think it's time you found a new place." I blinked at him. "What?" He folded his arms, didn't look sorry. "Claire's moving in." I stared at him. "You can't be serious." "She's my wife now." My knees nearly gave out. "You married her?" He nodded. "Last weekend, quiet ceremony." And then, like a dagger wrapped in silk, he added, "She deserves to feel respected in her own home." Her own home, the same home I cleaned, paid for, maintained, protected. The same home I sacrificed promotions for, cooked in, cried in, grew old in. Now suddenly it was hers? I felt something inside me break. Not just heartbreak. Disbelief. He walked away after saying it. Just walked out the door like it was a normal conversation. No guilt, no apology. I stood in that kitchen for a long time. I looked at the cabinets I had painted, the photos I had framed, the couch we picked out together 10 years ago, after sitting on 30 others. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I went into the bedroom, pulled out an old suitcase, and began to fold my clothes, because if he couldn't see what he was throwing away, then I wasn't going to waste my breath trying to remind him. I folded my clothes slowly, not because I had too much to take with me, but because my hands were shaking, and I needed to do something that made me feel in control. One drawer at a time. Shirts I hadn't worn in years. Pajamas I used to wear on cold mornings when I made Richard's favorite oatmeal. The cardigan he bought me for my 50th birthday, still with the tiny perfume stain on the sleeve from when he hugged me that night. I packed them anyway. I wasn't sentimental anymore. I was clearing a life that clearly didn't belong to me. The home was quiet. Too quiet. Not because it was empty, but because the silence now meant something different. This wasn't the silence of routine or comfort or love. This was the silence of being erased. Richard didn't come to check on me. He didn't peek into the room, didn't ask if I was okay. He stayed in the kitchen. I heard the sound of a can opening, a fork clinking on a plate, the fridge door closing. He was having lunch, like I hadn't just lost everything. Claire hadn't moved in yet, but her perfume already lingered in the hallway. Something floral. Too young, too sweet. There were new throw pillows on the living room couch. I didn't buy them. There were new mugs in the cabinet, pink and gold. Heron. I stared at one of them, hand-painted with the word wifey across the front. I almost laughed. After 40 years of loyalty, I was being replaced by a woman who called herself wifey on a cup. By the afternoon, I had 2 bags packed, just the basics. I didn't know where I was going yet. A friend's guest room, maybe a motel. I hadn't thought that far ahead. I just knew I had to leave before Claire arrived, before I became a ghost in the house I built. I took one last walk around the rooms. Our bedroom, now their bedroom. The place where I held him through panic attacks, back pain, sleepless nights. The bed where I rubbed his legs when he couldn't sleep, where we whispered about dreams we never got to live. The hallway I decorated with old photos, most of which were already taken down. And then the kitchen, the heart of it all, where I stood for decades, making the same breakfast every morning while he read the paper. The place where we argued, laughed, danced once when the radio played something from the 80s. The kitchen where he told me I had to go because his wife deserved more. That word stung worse than any insult. Wife. It's funny how people treat a title like a crown. I never needed the word. I was loyal without it. I was more than a wife. I was a caregiver, a partner, a backbone. And yet here I was, being dismissed like a distant roommate. When I reached the door, I paused, keys in hand. My name wasn't on the lease anymore. That changed when we refinanced the house years ago, and I didn't fight it. I trusted him. I thought trust was stronger than paperwork. I was wrong, but I hadn't lost everything. Not yet. Because in the hallway closet, tucked into a dusty folder above the winter coats, were copies of our old home purchase documents, back when we bought the first place together, before it was sold, refinanced, and rewritten, under his name only. My name was on that first deed, so I took it, not because I wanted to start a fight, but because I suddenly realized I might still have power, even if he didn't think so. I slipped it into my bag, zipped everything up, and took one last breath. No tears, no begging, just the quiet sound of the front door clicking shut behind me. I checked into a roadside motel with wallpaper peeling in the corners and a bedspread that hadn't been replaced in years. The woman at the front desk didn't ask questions. She slid me a key card, told me breakfast was served until 9, and pointed to a vending machine in the hallway. Room 208. It was cold and smelled like bleach, but I didn't care. I dropped my bags on the floor, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the small TV on the dresser. I didn't turn it on. The silence was too thick. I sat there for what felt like hours. 40 years. 40 years of care, of loyalty, of giving more than I had, all undone in one conversation. You should move out. She deserves peace. Claire's my wife now. The phrases repeated in my head like a broken song. No matter how many times I tried to breathe, my chest felt tight, like I'd been dropped in the middle of a storm without a map, without shelter, without anyone who even noticed I was gone. I thought about calling someone, but who? Most of my friends were tied to Richard, his poker buddies, their wives, the couples we'd go to dinner with on occasion, the ones who smiled at me, but whose loyalty would always bend toward whoever had the most power. And now, that wasn't me. I didn't cry that night. But I didn't sleep either. I just lay there, listening to the buzzing light outside the window and the occasional thump of someone walking down the hall. At some point after midnight, I sat up and pulled out the folder I'd taken from the hallway closet. Inside, the original deed to our first home, signed by both of us, Linda M. Carlton and Richard D. Mercer. The signature was shaky on my side. I remember my hands trembling from excitement that day. We were 25. We had just scraped together enough for a down payment on a tiny 2-bedroom with chipped tile and a leaking faucet. We painted the walls ourselves, stained the floor darker than we meant to, and laughed when we spilled an entire bucket of blue paint in the hallway. I stared at the document, running my finger along the ink. My name had been there the whole time. That house was sold years ago, but it proved something. that I had built a life with him, not beside him, with him, and that meant something. I began digging through the folder, old bank statements, letters, photocopies of tax forms with both our names, a medical directive from 5 years ago listing me as his healthcare proxy, and something else, something I had forgotten, a handwritten note from Richard, folded into a birthday card he gave me on my 60th. You've saved my life more times than I can count. If I go before you do, I want you to know that everything I have should be yours. You earned it, every damn piece of it. It wasn't legally binding, but it was real. It was his truth. Before Claire, before the silence, I held the card against my chest, feeling my pulse slow for the first time in days. I didn't know what I was going to do with any of it yet, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't just some woman who overstayed her welcome. I was a woman who had built a man's life, only to be thrown out of it when he wanted something shinier. And now, I was going to rebuild mine, not with rage, not with revenge, but with clarity, and one quiet step at a time. The next morning, I walked to the small diner down the block from the motel. It reminded me of where I used to work when I was young. Red booze, sticky tables, and a waitress who called everyone honey. I sat in the far corner, ordered coffee and eggs, and pulled the folder from my bag. Everything in me wanted to just move on. To leave it all behind, start fresh, pretend it didn't hurt as much as it did. But I also knew pretending would only protect Richard and Claire, the woman who smiled her way into a life I spent 4 decades holding together. So I opened the folder again. There were layers I hadn't noticed before. Statements, receipts, notes I wrote on the backs of envelopes to track grocery costs when money was tight, printouts from joint bank accounts, old utility bills in both our names. One page caught my eye, a refinancing document from 10 years ago when Richard said it was just easier to put everything in his name for the new mortgage. I had signed it, of course. He assured me it didn't mean anything, that we were still partners. But beneath that signature, in small, faded print, was a clause I had never noticed. Previous equity split remains in original proportions, unless otherwise stated. And in our original documents, tucked right above the page with our 2 shaky signatures, it showed the split. 50-50, half the house's value, still mine, even if it was now technically under his name. I sat back in the booth, heart pounding. Not out of revenge, but relief. He hadn't wiped me out completely. Not legally. Emotionally? Yes, but not on paper. That mattered. It meant something. I took a deep breath and opened the envelope with the healthcare paperwork. Another detail I had almost forgotten. 5 years ago, when Richard had his heart scare, we sat in a hospital room and filled out his health directive. The nurse told us to list next of kin, emergency contacts, power of attorney. He listed me, not Claire. He didn't even know her back then. And guess what? He never changed it. I double-checked with the hospital admin department later that day, called, gave my name, and asked if I was still listed. They confirmed I was. Ms. Carlton, yes, you're still on file as his emergency contact and medical proxy. I hung up the phone and stared at the motel ceiling. He had replaced me with someone shinier in his day-to-day life, but in the systems that mattered, in the banks, the hospital, the legal documents, I was still the one who counted. He forgot to erase me, and now, that would cost him. I didn't feel victorious. I felt calm, because I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to show up at the house and demand he take me back. I didn't want him back. What I wanted, what I deserved, was closure. Real closure. And maybe compensation, not out of greed, but because I earned it. 40 years of unpaid labor, of invisible support, of being the woman behind the man who now called someone else wife. So I picked up my phone and made one more call. A woman answered. "Harper Law Group," she said. "This is Simone speaking." "Hi, Simone," I said. "I think I need to talk to someone about cohabitation rights and emotional financial contribution. My name's Linda Carlton. I have 40 years of receipts and a story you might want to hear." Simone met me at the law office 2 days later. The firm wasn't big, just a modest glass door between a pharmacy and a dental clinic, but the moment I walked in, I felt something shift. Like this time, the system would finally hear me. She was in her 30s, direct, kind-eyed, and more professional than anyone I'd dealt with in years. She didn't make me feel old or slow or overly emotional. She didn't speak over me. She just listened. I told her everything, from the beginning. Richard's fall at 35, the years I worked double shifts when his business failed, the nights I nursed him through flu, stress, insomnia, the time we raised his niece for a year without ever receiving support, the money I funneled into his life, slowly, steadily, quietly, and then the ending, how he replaced me like I was nothing, no warning, no honesty, just Claire. When I finished, I handed her the folder, the co-signed documents, the joint account statements, the tax filings, the refinancing clause, the power of attorney paperwork, the healthcare directive still listing me as his contact, and finally, the birthday card with his handwritten message. "Everything I have should be yours. You earned it." She flipped through every page with a calm, steady eye. When she looked up, she didn't say, "Wow." She said something far more powerful. "He messed with the wrong woman." Then she smiled. "You ready to let me handle this?" I nodded. For once in my life, I let someone else carry the burden. Within the next 2 weeks, Simone built a solid case. She didn't aim for drama. She didn't file a lawsuit. That wasn't Linda's style. Instead, she drafted a formal settlement proposal, a clean, precise legal document that included a list of financial contributions Linda made during the 40 years of cohabitation, the clause from the refinancing paperwork that legally protected her equity rights, the power of attorney, emergency contact designation, and medical authority still in place, a reference to common law partnership under local laws, legally acknowledging Linda's role as a domestic and financial partner over 4 decades. At the end of the letter, Simone wrote, "You want your new wife to feel respected. Now she will by watching you face the truth." They didn't deliver it to Richard in person. They mailed it, certified, quiet, clean. 3 days later, Richard called, not to scream, not to apologize, to negotiate. "Linda, come on. Was this really necessary?" I didn't say anything. He kept talking. "You know Claire's been stressed. This isn't easy for her either." That sentence, not easy for her. The woman who moved into a home she didn't build, who never cleaned his vomit off the bathroom floor, who never paid a single bill or sat through a single counseling session. But she was stressed. Of course. I finally spoke. "Did you ever stop to think how it felt for me?" I said. Silence. Then a soft, pathetic reply. "I didn't think it would go this far." "It didn't go anywhere, Richard. You shoved it here." He tried to play it down, tried to ask if I'd consider a private agreement without dragging things out, but it was too late, because for once, I had leverage, and I wasn't giving it up. I handed the phone to Simone. She handled it from there. Claire sent the first email. It was short, clipped, and clearly written in anger. "We were hoping to handle this as adults. There's no need to ruin Richard's reputation or cause problems for our marriage. If you care about him as much as you say, you'll back off and let us move forward in peace." I didn't reply. I forwarded it to Simone. She added it to the growing file of documentation, proof of pressure, of subtle threats, of Claire's awareness that her shiny new life wasn't as secure as she thought. Then Richard tried again. He showed up at the motel. I was walking back with groceries when I saw his car parked near the side lot. He was leaning against it, looking smaller than I remembered. Same face, but none of the charm, none of the warmth, just desperation. He straightened up when he saw me. "Linda," he said, "please, can we talk?" I didn't stop walking. I passed him like I didn't even hear. He stepped in front of me. "You don't have to do this." I looked him in the eyes for the first time since I left. "I'm not doing anything, Richard. You did this. I'm just responding." He swallowed hard. "She's pregnant." The words didn't hit me like he thought they would. I felt nothing. No sting, no tears, no jealousy, just calm. "You're going to be a father again?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Then maybe," I said, "you should learn how to respect the woman who raised you for 40 years. Then I walked past him. That night, Simone received a call from his lawyer. Suddenly, Richard wanted to settle. The agreement was clean. Linda would receive a financial settlement equal to 50% of the current home's equity value, plus additional reimbursement for documented caregiving support over 40 years, adjusted to inflation. Nothing exaggerated, nothing dramatic. Just what was fair. Claire didn't take it well. She ranted online about jealous women, posted cryptic quotes about betrayal and drama, but she had no legal footing. None of the history, none of the documents. She was just a new wife in a house that someone else had built, and now they had to pay for what they erased. Richard's friends began to distance themselves. A few mutual contacts even reached out to me privately. I had no idea what really happened. "You were always the one keeping him together. If you ever need anything." I didn't reply to most of them, not because I was bitter, because I had moved on, not up, away. The settlement hit my account 2 months later. I stared at the number on the screen and didn't feel rich. I felt validated, seen. The money wasn't everything, but it was a symbol, a receipt for 40 years of invisible labor, and I was finally ready to start over. I used part of the settlement to buy a small house 2 hours away from the city. It wasn't big, but it was warm. Yellow shutters, a little garden, a front porch with a view of open sky instead of walls closing in. The air smelled like earth, not chemicals, and when the wind moved through the trees, it whispered, not screamed. It wasn't just a house, it was mine, every piece of it. No shared titles, no names I had to trust, just Linda. For the first week, I didn't unpack much. I let myself breathe. I opened the windows. I made tea and drank it on the porch wrapped in a blanket. I read books without checking the time. No one called. No one asked me to make dinner. No one left socks on the floor or forgot the garbage or needed me to save them. The quiet was healing, but after a while, something inside me stirred. Not anger, not grief, purpose. Because I knew I wasn't the only one. Women like me exist everywhere. Quiet, forgotten, erased after decades of service. Some are wives, some aren't. Some gave up careers, dreams, health, time. Some were never even called partner, just the help. And they deserve to be seen too. So I started something, a small group at first, just 5 women I met at the local church hall. We sat in a circle with cups of coffee and talked about being left, about being used, about being silenced. And then we started writing letters to the women we used to be, to the men who walked away, to the systems that let it happen. We called it the after years. It grew. More women joined. Some brought scrapbooks. Some brought tears. Some brought rage they didn't know how to name. One woman had cared for her husband's parents for 12 years, only to be asked to leave after he remarried a woman half his age. Another had raised 3 children for a man who never even listed her in his will. And me? I just listened. And when I finally spoke, I read aloud Richard's birthday card, the one that said, "Everything I have should be yours. You earned it." There was a silence in the room that wasn't heavy. It was powerful. These women weren't weak. They were warriors in soft shoes, and I had become one of them. One evening, as the sun set behind my house, I stood barefoot in the garden. I had planted lavender and rosemary near the porch steps. The scent reminded me of my grandmother's kitchen, safe, gentle, fierce in its own way. I pulled out my phone and looked at a message I never replied to, from Richard. "I hope you're okay. I miss you." I didn't respond, because the woman he missed didn't exist anymore. I had become someone new, someone stronger, not out of revenge, out of reclamation, and nothing, no title, no marriage certificate, no tearful apology, could undo that. Autumn settled in slowly, turning the trees outside my house gold and crimson. I loved watching the seasons change now, like I was witnessing the world transform without having to chase after it. I didn't look back often, but one morning, an envelope arrived that forced me to. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with Richard's handwriting. "I'm sorry. Claire left. The baby wasn't mine." I read it twice. Then I folded it neatly and placed it in the back of my desk drawer without a word. I wasn't surprised. Claire had always been smoke and sparkle, a show, a reaction to the fear of growing old and being seen as ordinary. She came into his life like a spotlight and left like a shadow. And now he was alone. The man who told me to leave for the sake of his new wife now sat in the same house, my house, surrounded by everything I built, but it was hollow. He had burned the walls of loyalty for a flicker of attention, and all that was left now was dust. A few days later, I received a call from a mutual friend, Lisa, one of the few people who had stayed in touch without picking sides. She sounded nervous. "Richard's been asking about you," she said. I didn't answer. "He's not doing well. He's quiet. He says he made the biggest mistake of his life." I looked out the window at the garden I planted with my own hands. "He did," I said calmly, "and he'll live through it, just like I did." She didn't argue. She just sighed. "I'll tell him you're okay." That was the last time we spoke. Meanwhile, the After Years group had grown into something beautiful. We hosted monthly gatherings now, not just in my town, but 2 others. I partnered with a local therapist to offer low-cost counseling. We created an online page for resources: how to legally protect yourself, how to document shared assets, how to speak up before it's too late. We weren't just healing, we were teaching. And I felt whole again, not because I had found someone new, but because I had finally found me. One evening, I sat on the porch, watching the sky melt into orange and lavender, and I thought back to who I was that day. I left Richard's house, broken, ashamed, small. I was none of those things now. I was rebuilt, and not a single piece of him lived in this version of me. On the 1-year anniversary of the day I left, I did something I hadn't planned. I got in my car, drove the familiar roads back to the place I once called home, and parked across the street. Richard's house, our house, looked the same, at least from the outside, but something about it felt different, smaller, dimmer. The flowers I used to care for were gone. The porch was bare. The curtains, once freshly washed every month, now hung heavy and wrinkled. It looked like a home that had been abandoned from the inside out. I didn't knock. I didn't need to. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small frame. Inside was a photo of me and Richard from 1985, taken in front of the very first house we bought. We looked so young, laughing, arms wrapped around each other, covered in paint from decorating the walls. Back when love was still work, not comfort. Taped to the back of the frame was a note. It read, "You didn't replace me. You revealed me." I walked up the porch steps slowly, placed the frame on the doormat, and turned around. I didn't look back. I didn't cry. I didn't wait for the door to open, because this wasn't a return. It was a message, a full stop at the end of a sentence I spent 40 years writing. I drove home with the windows down, wind in my hair, and peace in my chest. The kind of peace that comes not from winning, but from walking away, knowing you finally chose you. 2 weeks later, I received a package in the mail. No name, no return address. Inside was the frame. Same photo, same note. But this time, there was a second line added underneath mine. And I never deserved any of it. I stared at it for a long time. Then gently I removed the photo and tucked it into a drawer with the others. and I placed the empty frame in the center of my mantle, a symbol, not of loss, but of release, because some stories don't end with revenge or regret, or even resolution. They end with reclamation. I didn't get the ring. I didn't get the apology I always wanted when I still wanted it, but I got something better, myself. And for the first time in 40 years, that was more than enough.